Has Britain's unswerving loyalty to the United States since 9/11 served or hindered Britain's own national security interest? At issue not just the deployment of British troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, but also allegations of British complicity in abuses of human rights. My guest today is Lord Guthrie, a former head of the British Armed Forces. As President Obama redefines American interests, should Britain be doing the same? Lord Guthrie, welcome to Hardtalk.
Thank you very much.
Now, you retired as head of the British Armed Forces some 8 years ago. Do you believe today that those armed forces are in a better or a worse state than when you left?
I think they're in a worse state because they've been asked to do a great number of things, and that's very costly. And I think what's going to happen very soon after a general election is there has got to be another defence review to see what we are all about. I mean, do we need a nuclear deterrent? Should we give it up? What kind of wars are we going to fight? And what sort of people are we going to have to fight them with?
The biggest questions you think have to be on the table?
I think it's absolutely crucial they are. I think the world has changed a great deal. A lot of equipment has become enormously expensive. And of course, any new government we have is going to be faced with terrible economic problems. And every Department of State defence is going to be looked at very carefully to see what it really has to do. And it's right for defence is looked at. No government wants to spend a penny more on defence than it actually has to do. But it also has responsibility for defending its own citizens and its own country. And how do you do that? Do you do that just by defending their home base? Or do you actually go overseas sometimes to actually take part in conflict, maybe a long way away here, but with globalization, what is happening, what happened in the Al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan was affecting us here.
Well, I want to talk about the difficult choices that have to be made and that you've just alluded to in the second half of this interview. But what I want to do at the start is actually ask you whether, over the last decade, you believe that Britain's strategic decision to be foursquare in alliance with the United States, whether it be in Afghanistan, Iraq, or wherever, frankly, whether that has been, on reflection, a strategic mistake.
Well, firstly, we can never mirror what the United States do, and I don't think we've tried to do that. But what we have to do...
Let me tell you what Robin Cook says Tony Blair said to the Cabinet at a crucial point in the run-up to the Iraq War. He said, and I'm quoting, "I tell you, we must steer close to America. If we don't, we lose our influence to shape what they do." That was his thinking.
Well, that is not against what I've just said to you. What I've just said is that we have to often go along with the Americans, and you can actually choose when you go along with Americans and not. But I don't think we can mirror exactly what the Americans do. We're not rich enough, we're not powerful enough. We couldn't begin to do that, and we shouldn't try to do it. But I do think we've got sometimes we will want to be with them, and we need to equip and train and have forces which actually are capable to do things alongside the Americans.
But so, when Blair committed to steering, in his words, close to America, what he found himself doing was committing to two major theatres of combat operations at the same time, in Iraq and Afghanistan. And you've already referred to overstretch and to the terrible resourcing issues facing the British Army. We weren't capable and are not capable of keeping that up.
I think we find it enormously difficult. I'm the first one to agree, and we would like to have been able to do more, which we couldn't. The judgment is, how much can you do? I suspect we cannot do as much as what the Prime Minister Blair said at the time. And that's been proved. But of course the campaigns always have unforeseen consequences, and that's exactly what's happened. I think the Iraq War wasn't well planned for what happened after the war. I think was a sorry story.
Well, you said afterwards that you thought the decision to go to war was, quote from you, probably wrong.
Well, I have said that, and I think this second Iraq War, it now appears that we went for the wrong reasons, and that Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction, and he was not intending to use them. I mean, he behaved as though he had, but he hadn't. So it now appears to be wrong. And it's quite unlike the first Iraq War, which I think was absolutely justification to go to war.
No, but it strikes me that there's something very important there. If you now say that we ended up fighting the wrong war because of our determination to stay foursquare in alliance with the Americans, it's not just a question of what that means for our resources, it's also a question of what it does to the moral integrity of the British Armed Forces. And I wonder whether you believe, looking back now at the last 10 years, whether we have sacrificed in Britain, to some extent, the integrity of our
Well, I
armed
think
forces.
we could say we have in the second Iraq War. I don't think we did in the first Iraq War. I don't think we did in Kosovo, and I don't think we did in Sierra Leone. I think they were all just wars in which we were right to take part in. But I do recognize that the second Iraq War is a bit different.
And what about the complicity that we now appear to see in some of the human rights abuses which the Americans appear to have been engaged in?
Well,
enhanced interrogation, for example, waterboarding, that sort of thing, Guantanamo Bay, extraordinary rendition, all of these things, it now appears in one way or another Britain had some complicity.
Well, first of all, I think that it is absolutely wrong. Torture, waterboarding, rendition is absolutely off limits. And we had all signed up to the Human Rights Declaration. All over the world, people signed up to that. And I think that the interpretation of what torture was, which came out from the United States, which was really justifying the unjustifiable, is absolutely wrong. I think torture, and I include waterboarding in that, and I include rendition, is cruel, obviously. It's unethical, it's wrong, and it's also not clever. It's counterproductive, it's dumb, because people will tell you what they think you want to hear. And it also, every time, I'm not saying torture never works, but just imagine the damage torture has done to the United States, the image of the United States around the world. People who were moderates are now against the United States. I think torture has been a terrible mistake.
And what do you think then it has done to the image and indeed the morale of the British intelligence and security services to be accused of complicity? If one takes the case of Binyam Mohammed, for example, a British resident who says that MI5 officers were present when he was tortured by others and were feeding questions to those who were interrogating.
Well, I think that is absolutely wrong. If they were there, that is completely wrong. I think the case of a man who died the other day, Libby, who died in a Libyan prison, who is alleged that under torture he was the person who said that Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda were in league. No, we don't believe that any longer. So you don't always get what is right. And the only way to stop this is for people at the top to make quite sure that it is absolutely off limits. Terrible things happen in war, and I'm quite prepared to see that people lose their temper, people do terrible things. But torture, the kind of torture people are talking about, waterboarding, seems to me absolutely wrong.
And should there be in Britain an independent inquiry to see how high up the chain of political and military command decisions were taken to, if it is indeed true, collude in
Well,
torture?
I think we ought to find out whether it's an independent inquiry or whoever does it. I don't know. That'd be something for the government of the day. But I do believe that we should follow this one through and not just say, well, we probably never get involved in that.
We see Tony Blair, who you, it has to be said, were very close to. From 97 to 01, you worked very closely with him, and you've spoken very highly of him. Tony Blair was asked in Esquire magazine just the other day about extraordinary rendition and what he knew. And he responded by saying this: "It's only ever journalists who ask me questions about issues like that. It is not an issue with the people out there." What do you make of a response like that?
I don't agree with that. I mean, I think it is an issue. there will be some people who will say, well, anything goes. But if you say anything goes, you're behaving like the Gestapo. You're behaving like the Gestapo behaved when they went into Russia, how the Gestapo behaved at torturing Jews.
Would you have said that?
Do we really want to get involved in that?
Well, I sense the passion in your argument, but I just wonder, would you have said that when you were serving as a young military officer in Northern Ireland in the late 60s and early 70s, when we know that the British military routinely used what has since been regarded as cruel and degrading treatment against suspected IRA prisoners?
Very tame compared to what waterboarding went on, but it was wrong.